What is up, everybody? Welcome in Purple and Gold Podcast, Monday, July the 13th. And we are recapping the Major League Baseball draft, which took place over the weekend, and it was very good. To Jay Johnson and the LSU Tigers, we are talking best case scenario. So let's go through this really quick for those of you who don't know. The Major League Draft is 20 rounds. Generally, players drafted in the first 10 rounds have agreed to sign with the team who drafts them. There is a 98% sign rate for guys who are picked in the first 10 rounds. So, of LSU's recruiting class, you were looking at those first 10 rounds, particularly the first 4 rounds, which took place on Saturday. Well, in the first 10 rounds, LSU did lose Logan Schmidt, a left-hand pitcher out of California who they knew they were going to lose. He was the 59th overall pick. And they lost Jensen Hirschkorn, another big pitcher out of California who was also expected to probably be picked high enough to sign. Then in the 4th round, they lost an outfielder, Wesley Robertson, who was not the outfielder they thought they would lose. We'll get to that in a minute. And then in the 5th round, the Cubs drafted a pitcher out of LSU's signing class named Dylan Blomker, who, quite frankly, I didn't think would be drafted at all. So that one was a little bit of a surprise. And so you're a little aggravated at that point because you thought, okay, Jay said we might lose between 6 and 8 guys. You've got all these big name people still out there. Well, then the rest of the first 10 rounds went by and no other LSU signees were picked. And so the excitement really started to build in LSU baseball circles. So then there was an hour-long break in the draft, and you kind of knew teams were going to go through their bonus pool, go through the people they selected in the first 10 rounds, and determine if there were any high school players that they wanted to throw money at early in the 11th or 12th round. And that happened for LSU twice. Spencer Evans, a left-hand pitcher, unfortunately was a guy LSU was hoping to get to campus. He was drafted by the Pirates, and he will most likely sign. And Will Adams, the big first baseman and left-hand pitcher who LSU didn't think they would get to campus, he was projected to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. He was drafted by the Braves. So you look at those 6 guys are likely gone. Now let's talk about the guys who will probably be on LSU's baseball team because it's an incredible list. Obviously, before the draft, Braxton Beatty, a left-hand pitcher, Lucas Naraki, a left-hand pitcher and an outfielder, and Nate Davis, the left-hand hitting center fielder, had all pulled their names out of the draft. Then you had Malachi Washington, who I don't think, for the last 18 months has been, linked to LSU, committed to LSU. I don't think any of us ever thought Malachi Washington was going to be on campus. He wasn't drafted until the 18th round, and he's already posted he's coming to school. An incredible get. Dominic Santarelli, the big power hitter, the left-hand version of Jared Jones, hit all these tremendous home runs at the combine. You thought it was 50-50, maybe even 60-40. He was going to go pro. He didn't get drafted until the 18th round. Cooper Sides, the big right-handed pitcher. Colby Stringer, the big right-handed pitcher. None of these guys were even drafted at all. So you lost 6 guys, more than likely, and there is a 7th out here. So there's an outfielder named Anthony Murphy who we all expected to go pro. He didn't have a lot of LSU stuff on his social media. Everything was MLB, MLB, MLB. He was supposed to be a 4th, 5th round pick. He was drafted in the 16th round. The expectation at LSU is that he will either sign for less money, maybe the Nationals will scrape a little something together for him, or he will ask out of his letter of intent / enter the transfer portal, however you want to, do that. But the expectation is he will not be at LSU. So you lost 7 guys, but quite honestly, and I don't want to diminish Dylan Blomker or Wesley Robertson, you would trade those guys for the guys you kept. LSU kept all 3 infielders, Parker Lowe, Jordan Martinez, Luke Tucker. They kept their catching prospect, Mason Belding. They kept first base prospect, Dylan Minity. They kept their junior college big right-hand pitcher, Major Osbolt. They got Braden Wisner, another right-hand pitcher, to campus. Braden Cupid, a left-hand pitcher, to campus. Of the 7 players that you are likely to lose, you expected to lose 4 of the 7. Adams, Hirschkorn, Schmidt, and Murphy. And then Jensen was one you probably, Evans was one you probably would have hoped to get to campus. And then Robertson and Blomker, you traded in essence for Malachi Washington and let's just say Cooper Sides. And I think that worked out tremendously in LSU's favor. So let's talk about the roster a little bit, and I'll explain the roster a little bit because I know there's a lot going around on social media right now that LSU may have to cut players, but I don't think they will. So let's start with the players on the current team. Derek Curiel was drafted 5th overall. Congratulations to him. He became the 7th LSU Tiger to be a top 5 draft pick. Jake Brown went 65th overall. Devin Sheeran, 128th, I think, to the Phillies. Santiago Garcia was drafted. He will sign. Grant Fontenot was drafted. He was out of eligibility. Connor Benj, Zach Cowan, Gavin Guidry, who could have come back but wanted to sign, he was drafted. So every player left on LSU's roster from last year, there are 16 players left. LSU added 8 players from the transfer portal, so they were at 24. And then they are at 17 if you count Murphy. That would put them at 41. The roster limit is 34. However, when the House settlement went through last summer and baseball became an individual sport, not one that only could have 11.7 scholarships, everybody could be on a full scholarship. Last year's incoming freshmen, schools had the opportunity to determine that those players would be called designated student athletes. And so however long they were eligible, they won't count against the 34. LSU has 7 remaining players from last year's freshman class. They did deem them all to be designated student athletes, so LSU's roster can be 41. If Murphy comes, it's at 41. If Murphy doesn't, it's at 40. Now, so we're fine there. Nobody's got to be cut. Nobody's got to be asked to leave. Everybody from the incoming class can remain. However, there are some real log jams now. So let's start in the infield. So LSU added Dawson Park and Cade Curlin. They'll play 3rd and 2nd. Milam came back. He's going to play short. The expectation is that Mason Braun will play first base. Dominic Santarelli may insert himself into that. But Jack Ruckert is back. Ethan Kloss left via the transfer portal. John Pearson is back. Well, now you've added Parker Lowe, Jordan Martinez, Luke Tucker, and Dylan Minity. I'm not going to tell you that Lowe, Martinez, and Tucker are going to play this year. More than likely, they are not. Curlin's going to play 2nd. Milam's going to play short. Park's going to play 3rd. I think Jack Ruckert is your incumbent backup. I believe they want to groom those 3 guys to take over in 2028 when the other 3 guys' eligibility and or draft years have come and gone and they leave LSU. But whether it's, and again, I hate to mention names, but whether it's a Dylan Minity, whether it's John Pearson, there isn't going to be a lot of meat on the bone for playing time. Milam is going to play every game at short. Curlin is going to play every game at 2nd. He's a 5th-year experienced defender who is a premier defensive second baseman. Now, these guys will come in and compete and push, and certainly if Dawson Park doesn't hit or Cade Curlin, they can do some other things, but there is a log jam there. And then you look at the outfield. So LSU knew they had to replace their whole outfield. Stanfield, Harden, Curiel, Brown, Everybody gone. They went out and added Bino Waters, Jason Wachs, and Angel Laya. Then Nate Davis withdrew from the draft. He's here. William Patrick was a returnee. He was here. Then you add Malachi Washington to this and the possibility of Lucas Naraki, who's a left-hand pitcher but can also play outfield. That is the reason why I think you will see Anthony Murphy move on one way or the other. There just isn't any playing time. And so I think you will sell Washington and Davis on being late inning defensive replacements, late inning pinch runners. Both of those guys can run. LSU's going to try to win the national championship next year. They're going to need that. And then Washington and Davis, in theory, would be two of your starting outfielders, with probably Laya next year when Waters and maybe Wachs move on. So you can see the logjam at certain spots. Obviously, Belding, the catcher, is a developmental prospect. He knows he's behind Aaron Beatty in a draft year. He knows he's behind Omar Cerna. I think you'll see him stick and stay and come here. He was always coming here to be the third catcher. I think this makes for really interesting choices. I think there are guys, and again, I'm not advocating for any of this, but I think there are guys like Mason Braun and Jason Wachs, who I kind of think everybody penciled in as a starter, and now you at least have some competition. Malachi Washington's prospect profile, he's an outfielder from Stone Mountain, Georgia, is pretty similar to Derek Curiel when Derek Curiel was coming out of California. So, I mean, you're talking about big-time prospects. Dominic Santorelli, Jared Jones on the 2023 national championship team, not 25 where he played a key role. He was the designated hitter for a large portion of that year. He batted .300, he hit 14 home runs. Now he faded a little bit down the stretch. Josh Pearson started playing. Trey Morgan came back in to play first base. You remember that whole thing, Braden Jobert. And so Jared Jones didn't play a lot in the postseason. But if you were going to tell me that Dominic Santorelli can't come in here and get, 80 at-bats? I mean, that's 20 games, 4 at-bats a game. He can't play a third of the games in the SEC, maybe more. He can't play, a handful of games in the non-conference to see if that power will play, whether it's at DH or first base. I think there's a lot more competition now. On the pitching side, this is wonderful that they were able to get Cooper Sides through. It's wonderful they were able to get Colby Stringer through. It's wonderful that they didn't lose anybody unexpected other than maybe Spencer Evans. And again, you added Sides, you added Stringer. Nobody drafted Major Osbolt. So again, you kind of traded Blomker and Evans, if you will, for Stringer and Sides and Braden Cupid and some others. So they're going to have an influx of pitchers, and I don't think anybody's role on the pitching staff is truly incumbent. Obviously, you bring back Kason Evans and Cooper Moore and William Schmidt, and they'll get every opportunity to be in your weekend rotation. But if Landon Hood, the transfer from Gonzaga, if he develops into something more than a reliever, if one of these freshman pitchers is just outstanding, I don't think anybody's role on the pitching staff is necessarily set. So we will let this play out in the fall, but this went about as good for LSU as this possibly could have gone. LSU was gutted by the draft last year, and it really hurt their depth, and it really caused them to have to go out in the transfer portal and do some things that we know ultimately didn't work out. That was not the case this year. The rebound was in LSU's favor, and boy, it was in LSU's favor big time. There are some other teams. Tennessee had a good run at this. Vanderbilt had a good run at this. Some other SEC schools got guys to campus. This was a trend this year, but certainly LSU got as many or more between the transfer portal, the returning Stephen Milam, Cade Aaron Beatty, and now this draft class, this roster